Module 2, Specific Objective 1, Concepts and Indicators of Development. The concept of development has undergone change over time. Up until the 1970s, the focus of society was on a concept called economic development. However, this had inherent shortcomings, i.e., it didn't focus upon human development. More recently, because of environmental impact upon the global environment, the concept of development had to change again to include environmental concerns and making the world's resources last to produce a new concept of development called sustainable development. The concept of development evolved to include different kinds of development to reflect what was important at that time. Each type of development builds upon the preceding one. Economic development, sustainable development. Economic development focuses upon the material growth, the dollar value increase from one period to the next. Previous to 1970s, the focus was on the amount of money a nation made during a period of time. Growth development would have been augmentation of cash over time. Even though economic development has given way over time, economic indicators are still important even today. Economic development had a significant drawback. Economic development displayed nothing about the quality of life enjoyed by society, i.e., nothing about their health, happiness, lifestyle, etc. Economic development is about maximization of profit and is self-defeating. Human development builds upon the concept of economic development. It attempts to diversify the focus of economic development to include human concerns. Economic development is still important, but it's now going to be multifaceted. Amartya Sen and Mahbub Haq are Nobel Prize winners for their work in human well-being and human development indicators. They proposed, without factoring the quality of human life and without focusing on well-being of people, there can be no development. True development can only occur when there is an expansion of human choice, when there are greater opportunities for the empowering of a people, and opportunities for people to maximize their human potential. While they proposed unique human elements to development, there is still need for money. They created Human Development Indicators, Human Development Index, HDI, which constitutes part of Human Development Paradigm, HDP. True development can only be assessed through material and non-material elements. The Human Development Index, HDI, is a statistical tool used to measure a country's overall achievement in its social and economic dimensions, i.e., the health of people, their level of education attainment, and their standard of living. Sustainable development suggests that the environment in which we live in is non-renewable. The environment has to be taken care of. Any development must find a unique equilibrium. There cannot be impacts to the environment which are not calculated in our developmental thrust, i.e., use of our resources, becomes the focal point of sustainable development. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sustainable development is driven by a concept called conservationism. Sustainable development finds an equilibrium between money, human well-being, and the environment that is practical and can be maintained. It goes further than human development in its strife for equity, respect, and dignity of human life. Sustainable development seeks to ensure that future generations will be catered for. It arose from recognition that if human society continues along the path set pre-1970s, we will ultimately consume ourselves. Sustainable development, while practical for already developed nations due to vast stores of wealth, environmentally conscious manufacturing, and all necessary first world infrastructure, third world or developing nations face all the challenges of development, opposite to those listed above. The Caribbean consists of third world nations whose resources have already been exploited and depleted, e.g. gold repatriated to Spain. In order for third world nations to ever embark upon sustainable development paradigm, we need a paradigm shift in the way that development is pursued in the Caribbean. Challenges facing Caribbean development. Developing nations, historical capitalism. This reflects the several systems of production, e.g. repartimiento, encomienda, plantation, indentureship. One European nation after another has successfully, continuously, purposefully exploited the Caribbean's wealth. Historical precedent of neglect for human dignity. Our societies, e.g. Guyana, Cuba, Trinidad, and Tobago, have been built upon the exploitation of human beings. In today's society, there is a phenomenon called social injustice, where human rights are not respected. Whenever one person is not treated with respect or equitable treatment, there can be no development. Lack of resources. In order to achieve development, there must be an income. Many Caribbean countries lack a basis to build an economic platform, except Trinidad and Tobago. The lack of resources can be linked to the historical aspects of exploitation. Minerals in the ground are also considered resources, including those necessary for plant growth. Our resources have been monetized and stolen. Legacies of the plantation. This deals with two major issues: productivity and empowerment. Productivity, a person's willingness to put out labor effort. The plantation society created a poor work ethic. This means that as a Caribbean people, we use opportunities to avoid work rather than contribute positively, least work, for same pay. Empowerment. For people to contribute positively in society, people must be empowered. Traditionally, legacies of the plantation inhibits these factors due to social stratification, divisions that divide and rule to regulate society. Classism disrupts rather than unify society. Social justice aims to achieve perfect equity. There is social justice breaches. Some groups are deprived of their human rights as it is embedded in our ideology. Lack of money. Much of the Caribbean's wealth has been repatriated, a third world to metropolitan movement of money. The Europeans stole from the Caribbean, thus the Caribbean suffers from economic crises. Lack of education. Opportunities given to Caribbean people is minimal since they lack knowledge. Thus, Caribbean people only attract labor-based jobs, i.e., income and quality of life are small. This is associated with lack of empowerment opportunities. Heavy dependence upon traditional industry. Traditional industries are primary industries, e.g. agriculture, extraction industries. They are a major part of employment. These jobs are low-yielding. Since the only jobs available are low-yielding jobs, there is an unwillingness among people to advance themselves. These traditional industries make up a significant part of the GNP. It is oftentimes a poor use of land and labor resources. Traditional industries may be susceptible to disease, natural disasters. Losses cannot be easily incurred because of the heavy dependence on these types of industries, e.g., Grenada, loss of nutmeg farms. Internal problems in certain societies. This echoes social stratification. Guyana, alienation, exclusion of the Amerindians. They are inhibited from contributing to development. They are seen as inferior. Thus, growth in society becomes limited, stagnated, arrested. Negative social attitudes of society, exclusion of people due to race, religion. Social attitudes to the environment are self-destructive. It is short-sighted to think resources on our planet are inexhaustible. Lack of opportunity for the masses, e.g. lack of healthcare, education, empowerment opportunities. Lack of proper government planning, abuse of government resources. Government is given the responsibility of using national wealth to meet the developmental objectives of the nation. If they don't plan, the money is going to be expended. Abuse of resources, corruption, theft, misappropriate use of money in high places, lack of good governance, inequitable distribution of income. Ideally, equity is not just a personal attitude, but it is part of the government agenda. A government is mandated to find equity for the people, e.g. creating more educational opportunities or giving people more national wealth. They should promote equity of income generation. However, in the Caribbean, socioeconomic polarization exists. There are obscenely wealthy people and then poverty-stricken people. While some people enjoy high quality of life and have access to human development factors, the majority of people are disenfranchised. Attitudes to minority groups, a social injustice breach. Poor attitudes to people who are different. Intolerance to subculture groups. Exclusion of groups, therefore dehumanization of groups. If one person is dehumanized, there is no development. In overview, the Caribbean has to change social, economic, and even industrial attitudes to make these more compliant with the sustainable development paradigm. In order to become more geared towards sustainability, all Caribbean nations need to address certain problem areas. Millennium Development Goals, MDG, and Sustainable Development Paradigm, SDP. The MDG was created by the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, as part of the paradigm for achieving sustainable development in developing nations. It is goals, objectives for third world nations. These are prescribed from global planners. Even though these are ideals, they can't always be implemented due to lack of resources in a nation. Hence, they must be taken with a certain degree of flexibility. Reduction of poverty, increase in literacy, stabilizing the growth rate of the economy, providing opportunities for the empowerment of the masses, creating opportunities for social, political, and economic inclusion of disenfranchised groups, promoting equitable distribution of income, stabilizing employment levels. People should have sustainability of employment. Some jobs may be seasonal due to weather, etc. Stability of the political process system, e.g., Haiti has the worst track record for development in the Western Hemisphere. Dealing with issues uniquely relevant to women and children, protection of weaker people in society. This is not limited to men exploiting women, but also to women in workplace, maternity. One developmental problem is that there is an androcentric world. Men have no tolerance for women's problems. Reduction of diseases, e.g. communicable and non-communicable diseases, promoting socioeconomic equity, methods to ensure those who are at risk enjoy some level of economic well-being, promoting environmental conservation, introducing and using technology as part of the manufacturing process. One of the major drawbacks is that our rate of output, productivity is very low. To increase output productivity, one must use technology as part of the manufacturing process. More money, more human services provided. Pillars of development. This is the philosophical ideology of Mahbub ul-Haq. The idea of HDP was originated by Mahbub ul-Haq. In the HDP, there were about 30 major factors HDI to consider. Some were more outstanding than others, e.g. life expectancy, mortality rates, levels of literacy, access to education, standard of living and GDP per capita. The HDP seeks to assess key elements that impact upon human well-being. Other factors are to be considered, since there needs to be certain pillars of development in place. To understand HDP, these address a major area of any nation's developmental thrust: sustainability, equity, empowerment, productivity. These may be studied separately but are interrelated to produce an ideal developmental situation. Pillars of development recognize certain human needs need to be satisfied for sustainability to be achieved. The pillars need to be achieved in the following order: empowerment, equity, productivity, sustainability. Indicators of human development, IOD. Indicators of human development are variables, factors that can be quantified, assessed as a means of understanding advances made by a nation in achieving development. For these HDI, the factors must be seen as important throughout the world. Material indicators are economic, infrastructural in nature. They can be quantified by money. They are important because it is a guide to allow a nation to understand its economic position. However, material indicators don't tell the view. Quality of life enjoyed by a people, nothing about its well-being. Material indicators include levels of output. This is the product of a nation over a given period of time. Two concepts are applied here: gross national product, GNP, and gross domestic product, GDP. GDP is the value of goods and services generated and sold within the economic boundaries of a nation. GNP is the GDP plus export earnings. GDP and GNP are useful because it allows for economic growth from one period to the next to be seen. It creates averages per capita income. It allows for long-term economic planning. It allows for annual budget allocation. National income figures make comparisons with other nations and attract foreign direct investment, FDI. However, GNP and GDP tells us nothing about the allocation of a nation's money, the needs of a people being met, the state of poverty of a nation, inequitable distribution of income, mismanagement of money, corruption, how much money was used to repay debt, the status of environment, the opportunity of empowerment of the people. Per capita income, this is based upon a simple formula: average money equals total income, GDP. Total population per capita income is useful for getting an average of money to compare with other countries. Per capita income fails to say anything about income generation, levels of well-being as a people, levels of productivity of a people, polarization, racism. Per capita income presents a theoretical ideal, but in reality, it is untrue. Employment levels may tell about how many people are still dependent upon government resources. It is important to tell the nation how much jobs are available and needed. However, employment levels don't tell about stratification in occupation, Levels of education, income levels, income distribution, seasonality, e.g. in Jamaica, 4,000 jobs are created in the harvest season. Make work schemes. Caribbean societies create short-term employment to please the masses, such as CPEP, URP. Levels of investment, infrastructural shows how much has been added physically to a nation, e.g., new roads. Money has been spent on infrastructure, which is beneficial to the physical development. Ideally, by improving investment, there may be increased productivity potential. Levels of investment infrastructural fail because the benefits may not be felt by the entire nation. Nothing is said about environmental destruction, alteration of landscape. Nothing is said about who the employment opportunities were given to. Gini coefficient. This is a mathematical evaluation of income distribution in a society. 0 represents perfect equity and 100 represents inequity. In the Caribbean, the Gini coefficient is between 20 and 70. This implies polarity, i.e., unequal distribution of income. Non-material indicators quantify the difficult understanding of human well-being. To understand well-being, quality of life, uniquely human, indicators have been created. Equity between classes. This is relevant on both the economic and social spectrum because it is about socioeconomic equity. The social spectrum implies the equity of people's lives. No social stratification occurs when there is perfect equity. There is creation of an egalitarian society. In the Caribbean, there are tremendous challenges in achieving the non-SEF material indicators of development. Consider Caribbean societies that came from a history of stratification. In the Caribbean, there was traditionally the elite class, who enjoyed wealth and social prestige. Everyone else was poor and disenfranchised. This becomes a developmental challenge for the Caribbean. The Caribbean is characterized by social and economical polarization. In the Caribbean, there is a perpetuation of a superior and inferior class. Because of classism, a negative international reputation is formed that creates social injustice infringements, e.g. Amerindians in Guyana, no voice in politics and economics of the country. Inequity is a scandal where a nation alienates people and steals from them. This applied not only to Amerindians, but also old people, women, children, etc. Strategies that can be implemented to improve equity. Equity is important for people to feel value in themselves. It is worth more than money and speaks about psychological wealth. Thus, a government must be proactive in its treatment of classes, and they need to institute policies, laws to make the distribution of income more equitable. One major indicator of development is people's ability to afford basic needs of life. A government has to make every effort to meet the needs of those who are at risk in the population through proper management of money. This is to ensure those who are old, sick, and young are treated equally, e.g. old age pension, disability checks, widows and orphans relief funds, social welfare expenditure becomes a means of those helping those who cannot help themselves. Equitable distribution of income, redistribution of income. A government must be proactive in creating taxation policies, laws. In many developed nations, there are tax policies that fall under progressive taxation policies. The more you earn, the more you return. Progressive tax policies work in two ways. It reduces economic polarity, alleviates the burden on government resources. Investment in education, making educational opportunities more accessible. Many Caribbean countries have become aware of the need to education empowerment. To promote productivity, one must be given education. Creating access to education means that there is optimization of human resources, and the nation can now do more. It means that international ratings increase. Creating access to education means that there is an alleviation of burdens of the state. They are gainfully employed. Without education, lesser developed nations will be doomed to remain in socio-economic stagnation and labor jobs. Without education, a Caribbean people will be perpetually disenfranchised. Building more schools, more jobs in education, giving more scholarships, i.e. empowering people who show prowess. Additionally, government can provide funding for groups that have been traditionally alienated. This is called positive discrimination. One group is promoted over other groups. In USA universities, there are supposed to have 10% non-Caucasian people. Even though it is discrimination, it is geared towards empowerment of traditionally disenfranchised groups. The empowerment of women through education In Caribbean societies, there is gender stereotypes, e.g., they should be in the kitchen. The empowerment of women, while it works with empowerment and equity, also adds to the productivity of a nation. By depriving women, a nation is stagnating their own development and hampering their own future. Positive discrimination is also referred to as affirmative action, e.g., scholarships for women, certain races only. Productivity related to empowerment and sustainability. It is a concept that deals with how much is produced by a nation in a given period of time. However, levels of production is impacted by certain psychological and emotional factors, such as motivation of a people, levels of moral. Productivity deals with how happy a person is, moral, level of happiness, etc. Deals with the optimization of output. If moral happiness is low, output is small. Productivity is influenced by levels of education and can be limited by attitudes, including stratification. These are part of the plantation legacy. Racism. There are still some Amerindians who live in the bush and don't contribute positively to society. Discrimination and biases, gender, religion, decrease productivity. The work environment of a people affects on levels of productivity. With improved infrastructure, there is increased productivity. Adequate salary. Levels increase productivity. Everyone wants to feel like he is worth something. The use of technology improves a person's output. Mechanization and computerization in government agencies bring us in the 21st century and beyond. In order for Caribbean societies to achieve high levels of productivity, there must be a change of attitudes. Political stability and good governance. To achieve a stable political system, longevity is needed to put a time frame for which developmental initiatives can be implemented, e.g., housing plans, railways, etc. The concept of good governance means that a government governs for everyone, regardless of race, party affiliation, religion. Because of the legacy of the plantation, politics is a divisive stratification. E.g., in Guyana, politics is fractured along race. When one party is in power, one race is neglected. Good governance overcomes the plantation legacy and makes sensible use of limited resources for practical application and planning development. Good governance is about promoting equity within a nation. Equity may have socioeconomic impacts, i.e., the government is tasked with putting socially conscious laws and policies in place for the population to access the wealth of a nation. The laws must reach the "at-risk" population. Good governance implies fighting corruption and getting rid of nepotism. Then good governance is about promoting transparency. Transparency is a factor evaluated on a global scale. Caribbean countries rank among the lowest in transparency scales. Therefore, Caribbean countries have a lot of corruption and nepotism. The Transparency International body is the Corruption Perception Index. Barbados ranks 7,475, while Trinidad and Tobago ranks 175. Environmental purity consciousness. There needs to be responsible environmental factors. Even though the environment is physical, the real problem is the human attitude to the environment. As a HDI, the environment is a habitat that needs to be safe. Man's attitudes are riddled with misuse, exploitation, and mismanagement. Historically, most of the damage has already been done. Man's utilization of resources is correlated to world's environmental problems. This is a futile endeavor. Environmental conservationism is a part of any sustainable development paradigm, ensuring that we are able to meet our needs and needs of the future. Environmental consciousness needs a radical reassessment of Caribbean's people attitudes to the environment. Awareness, education, and sensitization of the public are needed in order to change our attitude. The government must be participant in the change process in the school curriculum, e.g., inclusion of education about forestry, coral reefs, and tourism. They must create laws to protect the environment from exploitation, and systems must be implemented to enforce the laws. Healthcare, quote, health is your wealth, end quote. Healthcare is a system to give society access to health. Health is a means by which people remain healthy by raising lifespan and quality of life. In the Caribbean, because of financial positions of Caribbean nations, provision of healthcare is often ineffective, non-effective, or inadequate. Many Caribbean nations are making efforts to expand healthcare, e.g., there are new hospitals in Cuba, new and refurbished hospital wings. The expansion of the medical sector includes the services available to society. In Trinidad and Tobago, we can now access advanced medical services such as brain and plastic surgery. In Trinidad and Tobago, however, there are many challenges facing the industry. Lack of trained personnel. Equipment is present, but not much to act. Lack of proper working machinery. Some Caribbean nations, e.g. Cuba, has globally recognized healthcare for its efficiency, productivity, and competence. Cuba exports surgeons. Trinidad and Tobago has taken several steps with the provision of more physical infrastructure and the introduction of a new system to access drugs, CDAP. CDAP is the only way for poverty-stricken to access drugs. Improved institutions and attitudes within society. This deals with the human quality of treatment within the public sectors. Trinidad and Tobago has just received gold diamond sats by improving attitudes, treatments of certain aspects, sectors of the general population. The launch of effort through public campaign is a viable option. With better treatment, the population will feel more satisfied and they don't feel alienated from government structure. A rationally coordinated system of policy measures. This deals with the planning of money. There must be a greater level of coordination and correspondence in planning and implementation of plans so that redundancy, misuse of resources will be eliminated. This is a chronic problem. Without coordination, there is bound to be wastage of resources. Module 2, Specific Objective 2, Factors that hinder, promote development, gender inequality, political ideologies and popular movements, distribution of wealth and resources, class boundaries and stratification issues, entrepreneurship activities, natural and human-induced disasters, government, policies, technology factors, global conditions, quality and relevance of education, tourism's contributions and challenges. Any nation in the world depends on combinations of these variables to stimulate its own levels of development. Any nation can implement these strategies to advance their levels of development, discovery of natural resources, increase in foreign direct investment, FDI, expansion of the skilled labor force, implementation of technology, diversifying the economy. Gender inequality. In the Caribbean, the society has been characterized by patriarchy. Patriarchy describes a social system where men are always dominant and women are treated as second-class citizens. European countries run on patriarchy lines, and they brought this mindset to the New World. They organized political and social relations in the light of it. Patriarchy influences Caribbean social relations to an extraordinary degree. Examples: male dominance in relationships often leads to families becoming sites of oppression and coercion for females, spouses, and daughters. Women's education tends to be geared to the female stereotype of domestic and nurturing skills, while that of men focuses on science, practical construction skills, and high-level intellectual activities, debating. Statistically, poverty affects more women than men, largely because most single-parent families are headed by a female, mother or grandmother. Gender inequality hinders the attainment of sustainable development because a group in society, e.g., women, are perceived to be inferior. They are alienated, voiceless, and disenfranchised. When women are stereotyped against, there is a social justice breach. Social justice supposed to maintain equity of treatment, regardless of age, religion, and education. Productivity of a society is negatively impacted. Productivity means development is based on output. If groups are restricted from working, productivity is hampered. Reduced taxation revenue for a government. If there are less persons working, there is a less tax generation. If a government has little money, they can't provide for the poor at risk in society. Strain on limited government resources. The government has little money, so the development of the whole nation is decreased. Invisible, intangible, psychological impact of discrimination, alienation. A group in society will feel inferior, which will have a negative impact on self-esteem, psychological health, and well-being. Potential of a nation is reduced. In order for sustainability, every human resource must be optimized. If a group is made to feel inferior, a nation is limiting potential growth. Negative international reputation, perception. A country will be seen as a backward people. As a nation, we are seen as creating a minority group, a group whose rights, dignity, social, political, and economic voices, participation is taken away from them. Overcoming challenges that hinder development. Promote educational access to disempowered groups for empowerment and enfranchisement. Sensitization of the need for every member of society to become aware. Creating legislation to defend and protect women from abusive situations, e.g., sexual exploitation. Creation of laws that make affirmative action to advance disempowered gender. Groups to deal with women issues, maternity, pregnancy. Oftentimes, women's problems are treated as hindrances rather than part of life. Attitudes towards women stem from an androcentric. Men are insensitive to these unique women's situations. Empowering women, allowing them to participate in society, e.g., more women at heads of organizations. Creating sexual harassment laws. Creating equal opportunity bills. Once one is qualified for a job, there is no reason why one shouldn't get the job. One should meet the criteria to get a job. There is pressure to promote greater levels of transparency, e.g., same salary for women. Attempt to degenderize occupation, e.g., how to remove stereotype from nurses. Political ideologies and popular movements. Politics is about utilization of power in the administering of plans and policies for the benefit of a nation. Since it is about making plans for a nation, a political model is linked with an economic model. Politics is thus about deciding how to best use a nation's limited resources. There are essentially two political ideologies and a resultant hybrid. Third, political model, economic model, democracy. Capitalism, the free market model. Communism, the planned economic model. Central economic model. Democracy, communism equals hybrid mixed economic model. In the Caribbean, there are variations of both political models. Democracy is associated with British West Indian, BW nations, and communism is associated with Cuba. The economic structure correlates with the political structure, and this dictates how a nation's resources are to be used. Central economic model, CEM, implies that the government owns all of the factors of production and resources except labor. The state is responsible for the production of goods and services, administration, and business. The communist system creates policies based upon the need to equally distribute a nation's resources to every member of the population. One of the driving motivational concepts of communism is equity. Equity is a gargantuan in their thinking. Development is consistent with government's planning. In theory, communism seeks to promote a classless, egalitarian society where everyone has equal rights. If a society is moving towards equity, then SEEP will follow and sustainability will become a reality, e.g., same healthcare, education, mobility factors. Ideally, the pillars of development can be fulfilled. Shortcomings of communism. Decision-making structure is inconsistent with the needs of the masses. Inefficient policy-making, since heads are unquote out of touch unquote with the people. No, private ownership of resources. There is little desire by the worker to make the business work, since there is no profit incentive. This lack of private ownership of business reduces income, generation potential, and results in a lackadaisical attitude. Wastage of resources in national. There is mismanagement of resources, and this means that business enterprises in the government won't profit. E.g., in Trinidad and Tobago, a hybrid political model is used. Coroni state, limited used an inefficient system of production, and this put a strain on government resources. 2,000 to produce and sold for $800. Police state, a communist state, is also referred to as a police state. The leaders are fearful of losing their leadership position, therefore, they rule with brutality. Each Cuba doesn't want international media coverage. Anyone who opposes Cuban heads becomes an enemy of the state. Fiscal period. The planned economic model is organized for a fiscal period 1 year. There are no revisions of these plans. There are no changes if affected by global crises or outside factors. Because there is no planning for contingencies, there are hardships on people. Inflexible. State planning cannot adapt to the changing needs of the people, since it is not flexible. E.g., diseases, natural disasters, climate are not accounted for. In the 1960s, Jamaica experimented with communism and their economy worsened. Free market model, FMM, is associated with democracy. There is a possibility to solve the problems of communism. FMM sees the government as a facilitator of business and economic growth in a society. FMM does not provide all goods and services. They do, however, provide basic services such as policing, laws, justice. There is no educational, health, or housing services provided. In the FMM, economic activity is governed by the law of demand and supply. The law of supply and demand defines the effect that the availability of a product and the desire for that product has on price. Generally, if there is a low supply and a high demand, the price will be high. In contrast, the greater the supply and the lower the demand, the lower the price will be. Essentially, in the FMM, the government leaves the producers to produce, and the prices will be decided by the consumers. There is a high level of inequity. Those who own the factors of production and resources of a nation are exceedingly wealthy, and those who don't own are poverty-stricken. The factors of production include land, labor, capital, management, enterprise. Any business needs these four to facilitate business. The FMM is individualistic and promotes socioeconomic polarity and classism. FMM is opposite to communism. FMM will never achieve SEEP and doesn't exist in the world. FMM has to be tempered by government. Participation in the economy. Mixed economic model. There is an incorporation of the FMM and CEM and hence a dual emphasis. FMM. Distribution of resources equity plus equity strives to get a compromise between economic and social development. The MEM is the most efficient model in achieving sustainable development. There should be sensible use of resources. The MEM allows government to plan for a nation's developmental objectives. The government also produces certain goods and services that it deems essential for human and material development. E.g., in Trinidad and Tobago, the government produces education, healthcare, water, electricity. The things that the state produces are what the nation depends on for sustainable development. There are similar disadvantages to that of the communist system. One thing that is consistent with the communist model is that the MEM ensures everyone has equal access to the wealth of a nation. They strive for high levels of equity in distribution of resources. MEM is referred to as the welfare state as government participates in the redistribution of resources, e.g., grants used to aid the quote, at risk, quote, population. Such grants care for those who can't achieve the minimum standard of living by giving aid. The state is attempting to ensure that everyone is able to achieve some minimal quality of life. The MEM also allows for private ownership of resources. However, the state reserves the right to intervene. E.g., in the mid-2000s, bad weather in Russia caused the potato and wheat crops to fail. The global price of corn increased. In Trinidad and Tobago, chicken prices increased. The oligopoly of chicken producers in Trinidad and Tobago gathered and decided to increase price of chicken. The government became aware of this. Since food is a major human indicator, this upset the population. The government asked the oligopoly to reduce their prices, but they refused. The government then accessed Suriname's chicken and flooded the market with a cheaper alternative. This forced the oligopoly to lower their prices or face bankruptcy. The government protects the population from price gauging. The Caribbean has a few nations that uses the MEM, e.g., BWI nations. These nations show highest levels of development. Bahamas, Barbados, Trinidad, and Tobago. Popular movements ideologies. These must contribute, impact, alter the concept of development, feminism, Rastafarianism, environmental consciousness, negritude, social justice and human rights, health consciousness. Popular ideology is defined as a system of ideas or beliefs that isn't politically oriented, which people begin to adopt as part of their lives. Popular ideology has the potential to change the way people live. Popular ideology can become a lobbying agent force. E.g., one of the lobby groups that came in the spotlight was the Highway Route movement. They raised awareness to issues relating to the environment and development. If the movement was successful, the government would have had to make a more suitable, friendly alternative than having the highway pass through the lagoon. Functions of lobby groups. These lobby groups bring pressure to bear upon society and government's policies based upon an issue that they perceive to be important. Lobby groups, based on popular ideologies, can bring about change in the way government administrates policies. A lobby group can be a voice for those who don't have a voice. A minority, marginalized, invisible, disenfranchised group of people can now be heard. A lobby group can raise awareness on an international scale, bringing about further pressure on society, government to act. A lobby group based upon popular ideology is an example of the practice of democracy. Idea of free choice. Even if people don't agree with matters, they have a chance to voice their discontent. Feminism relates to equity in women. Feminism tries to create stronger pillars of development. To promote development, they ensure the minority is given the best treatment respect that they deserve. Equity tries to ensure fairness regardless of pre-existing stratification barriers. Rastafarianism is a basis of rebellious ideologies, e.g. Bob Marley. Creation of reggae. Rastafarianism is based upon a principle of equity of treatment. In Rastafarian ideology, a concept of Babylon comes to signify all that is inequitable. Rastafarianism is an effort to preserve, maintain equal treatment for all classes of people. Environmental consciousness represents a tangible minority. We recognize our ability to change the environment, and we aim to control these abilities to not harm the environment. Thinking green means to consider the environment when we make decisions. Additionally, even on the smallest scales, people are changing their attitudes to the environment. This aids sustainable development. Negritude is a platform for the promotion of equity of a disenfranchised group. It is a literary movement that explores the atrocities, travesties that would have taken place due to European exploitation of African group. Although it might have catalyzed due to this group, it can reflect any type of exploitation. It helps to ensure that the exploitation never occurs again. Social justice and human rights are heavily linked. Social justice helps to preserve and ensure that there are human rights. In the Caribbean, there have been heavy disregard for human exploitation. It became a legacy of our society. One group or the other has been exploited. Egypt, Amnesty International is a human rights watchdog group that focuses on prisoners in the world's prisoners. Human rights, social justice. Natural rights are articles on the UN Convention on Human Rights. These articles, created by the UN Charter, seeks to create rules on how any human is to be treated. You are supposed to have certain inalienable rights, which means no matter where you are, once you are human, you are guaranteed those rights. Social justice strives to ensure that these rights are maintained for minority groups such as old, sick, suffering, etc. Health consciousness is a recognition of your own need to preserve your levels of health. In recent times, the global society is more conscious to health. Most diseases are lifestyle diseases and are due to our diet and lack of exercise. This relates to development because it would increase productivity. The people are more inclined to live better lives, so the quality of life is improved. Each cancer society, an ideology that influences behavior. In the Caribbean, there are a few organizations based on popular movements. CAFRA, Caribbean Feminist Research Association. Canary, Caribbean Natural Resource Institute. Caribbean Human Rights Initiative. Distribution of wealth and resources must ideally be equitable. The Caribbean has come from a history of socio-economic polarization. In the Caribbean, it was normal for one group to have all and another to have none. The plantocracy bourgeoisie class had all. That polarization has been transposed to Caribbean society until now. Therefore, equitable distribution of resources is one of the most pressing, challenging